Hello and welcome to Dropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And today we're looking at supposedly the first film noir. That's the reputation that this film has. Stranger on the Third Floor from 1940. You hadn't seen this before, right?
No, and it's so interesting actually. I mean, when I was watching it last night, I thought, why the hell has Mike chosen this, right? The first 10 minutes, right? And then, of course, it's one of those films that you've heard of. The name was familiar to me, but I didn't know why, right? And I am really keenly into film noir. Yeah, it's one of my great loves. So obviously this film must have registered in some way, but not in a way that I could articulate. It's just something that you've heard, right? But then, one's heard of so many things. So actually, I was thinking, why are we watching this? What has sparked Mike's interest in this?
Well, to be fair, I mentioned it to you before. Maybe you remember it from that, but who knows? It may have cropped up, in your circle somewhere along the line. But I certainly mentioned it before, and I've been wanting to watch it for a little while. Because I first saw this, I've only seen it once before, but I saw it on BBC Two at 2 in the morning. It's just one of the various films that they'd have on. And I was probably 16 years old. So this is, 15, 16 years ago. I think I was browsing on CFAX and the thing said the first film noir. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I watched this and I thought, oh God, it's a really interesting little movie. One I obviously have forgotten, or what even maybe didn't even register when I watched it the first time, is just how bad the acting is. There are elements of it that you go, oh, this is a real B movie, a real properly cheap B movie. But there are things about it, so that first 10, 15 minutes, as you say, you go, God, this is really not very good. Why did I want to watch this? And then Then it kind of explodes into imagination and visual expression.
Yes. It's fantastic. It becomes something extraordinary. And actually, as you say, it's, it seems very prosaic. And then actually, the stylishness, the lighting, the German expressionist sets, the dream sequence, Peter Lorre is acting, it really transforms it into something else. And, there's a quite a famous producer at RKO in this period who's called Val Lewton. Yeah. He did Cat People and The Leopard Man and, what is it? I Walk with a Zombie, all those films, which were made on really, really tiny budgets, right? And which most of their power comes from this oniric dream, fear, and then this lighting, right? And actually, it's also a precursor to that, that kind of, you can see how that kind of thing develops at this particular studio, RKO, in watching this film. And I read a little bit on it kind of yesterday because, I had one of those light bulb moments, right? Where you think, this is crap, this is fantastic, what is it? So, so I looked it up and it's very fascinating, really.
So what did you find out?
Well, I found out that the final screenplay, uncredited, was written by Nathaniel West. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Kind of one of the great American novelists, and I think he did Day of the Locust and so on. So that, for me, was interesting. I also found out that the director, Boris Ingster, who I'd never heard of before, had been one of the assistants to Sergei Eisenstein, right? And actually, you could see how a lot of the camera setups, the angles, kind of really hark back to something like an Ivan the Terrible and so on, right? There is a kind of a visual connection to the works of Sergei Eisenstein, which just realizing that makes sense. On a different level, Elisha Cook Jr., who is, the young man who's accused of the murder at the beginning, right? He's one of the great figures of film noir, makes, a completely legendary appearance playing a drum set, frenzied drum set in Phantom Lady. And also, there's of interest two things really. First, the female star, Margaret Talichet, right? Who this was a very brief career for her as an actress, because she married William Wyler, the great director of Days of Our Lives and so on. So again, she was interesting to me because she's one of those figures that you just read about in the background. She's somebody's wife, So it was interesting to see her in action, so to speak, right? And she wasn't very good, but she was much better than the male star,
Yeah, John Maguire.
Yeah, and the last person was Charles Halton, who played the Snoopy neighbor.
Yes.
Who who is a figure in all of this classic Hollywood cinema, and who I find particularly memorable in Lubitsch's To Be or Not to Be. Yeah,
right.
He's the one who says, Hitler should look like that. And the guy goes, but that is me. And he goes, well, then it should be different, right? So he's one of those people who is instantly recognizable, across a whole era of cinema. So that was kind of a pleasure for me to see.
And he probably gives the best performance in this, I'd say.
Yeah,
I think he makes the biggest impression, and he has the most. He has the or maybe Peter Lorre, but certainly
no, Peter Lorre definitely.
Charles Halton here, his character Mr. Meng has the whole thing about the main character imagining he wants to kill him, or having said he wants to kill him, and then imagining it going very badly, that people take that seriously. You kind of go, yeah, I understand why he wanted to kill him. I hate this guy too. I felt it.
He's brilliant. But Peter Lorre, to me, is a genius, of film acting. I mean, really, he just is, So, and it's very interesting to see him in this, because he's got a tiny role, really, So he's got very few scenes. He makes them all count, really. You can tell he's a murderer from the beginning, but actually you get a whole sense of him, I mean, he's sympathetic as well, right? And he's stylish, instantly memorable. He just does a few gestures, really, but he conveys so much threat, and also so much reasons for the threat. Yeah, I mean, he is playing somebody who's escaped from an insane asylum.
Right. Very cheap kind of storytelling, but he imbues it with something a little deeper.
Yeah, deeper, and also kind of, I don't know, more beautiful, really, because there is kind of like a certain beauty to the way that his face captures the light, right? Which is not beauty, in a safe sense. I mean, it's not necessarily attractive. Yeah, it's not sexy, but there is there's something very beautiful in what he does, and what, how he looks, and his voice. Yeah, it kind of, it conjures up things, really.
Yeah. So maybe I'll just say what the plot is, roughly speaking, and I will spoil it, but this is a film that's 80 years old now. Interestingly, it's only 60 minutes long or so, so it's a film that really doesn't outstay its welcome, and you feel, I mean, to me, the length feels so appropriate. Like, it doesn't need to do anything else, it's kind of stripped down. So John Maguire plays this guy, Michael, who is a reporter, and he's a star witness at this trial of murder. The guy on trial for murder is Elijah Cook Jr. And, I mean, to be fair, there are things about that don't actually make sense to me. Like he gets this raise at the start of $12 a month, which means that he can move in with his wife, or he's going to marry her. But it's like, but how is he getting a raise for being a star witness? That's not his job. But
no, it's not. He's not getting the rise for that. It's because he got a byline covering the story for the paper.
Yeah, but it's like it's his own story, isn't it? Because he's the witness.
Well, he's a witness.
It's sort of silly.
No. I think the film makes it clear. He's a witness to the story that he covered and got a byline for. So he's getting a raise because he now is a reporter with a byline. But he also happens to be a witness to the event because he was reporting on it and happened to be there. So
I don't know, because the newspaper headline that he has the byline under is reporter is star witness at this trial. So it doesn't make much sense. I mean, there's a lot of very heavy, clunky expositional dialogue and things being set up early on, with people basically saying, "You're my wife and I love you and we're going to move in together," and so a lot of that is incredibly clunky. And the kind of crux of this trial is that he saw Elisha Cook Jr. over the dead body of the guy who runs this cafe, but he didn't actually see him kill him. But what he does know is that recently, prior to that, he'd heard Elisha Cook Jr. say he had no money to pay for a meal, and then he said, "You wouldn't make me pay if I had a gun in your ribs." Right? And that line is that's pounced upon by the jury, and that is the reason that this guy's going to get convicted. And so, kind of racked by guilt, he goes home that night. Michael goes home that night and just starts thinking in his head, was that the right thing to do? Also, racked by guilt and also the concerns of his girlfriend. He says, this is the right thing to do. And he goes into this sort of dream sequence / imagined vision he's just worried, and the film goes into his psyche and starts imagining, oh my God, what if this happened to me? What if the next door neighbour, who I don't like very much, died, and then people jumped on things that I'd said about wanting to kill him? This could happen to me. And then it turns out he has been killed. Oh my God. And so this whole thing develops of like guilt and the imagination nightmare being made real, and what's going to happen. It all wraps up incredibly neatly, and in a kind of, again, in a kind of clunky, slightly cheap way. But the centre of that film is really expressive.
It's extraordinary. I mean, so let's, all Hollywood films in this period, in a way, there's two things. One is a kind of a meet cute, right, which is what happens at the very beginning with the couple in the diner. And then the ending always has to rhyme in some way. So, those scenes in the diner at the beginning, the very beginning and the very end, are atrocious, right? It's kind of really B-movie stuff. But then what the film does that's so extraordinary is it moves on from there. So once the trial of Elisha Cook Jr. happens, then you get this whole sequence of the film, which is really played out in the reporter's head.
Yeah.
Right? So actually what's so interesting is that it feels like silent movie acting, right? With the actor voicing his fears. Yeah, it's all internal, which is so interesting actually. And also, he is a very bad actor in the opening and closing sequences, but he is so well used, right? It's almost like, by just giving him to do gestures, it's almost like the camera captures his face in the light, right? As he is responding, to his internal monologue. And that is just fantastic, really, because, the actor becomes, he's such a poor actor, but actually he's so effective in the way that he's deployed in those sequences.
Yeah, in some ways it's kind of simplistic because it is kind of individual gestures that relate to the voiceover of his internal monologue. So it's like he's playing against himself, or with himself. It's like he's got chemistry with his own voiceover, and the way the camera kind of pushes in on him, the way you get these bizarre kind of trippy dissolves between various aspects of his imaginings, kind of things moving in and out of focus. I think the set design is wonderful. Kind
it's
of
incredible.
The empty courtroom, and it's just a few people over here. The camera is angled in such a way as to kind of distort the view. The thing about the scales of justice are constantly there, and they're bathed in shadow when he's having the nightmare.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
I think it's the set designer who did Citizen Kane.
Well, it's I don't know how to pronounce the name, but it's Van Nespol Glasse, right? And it's very difficult to credit him with that art direction because, like all major studios, it's the head of section who gets credited with the art direction, right? So it was under his direction, but it could have been, very easily one of dozens of art directors who did the actual job, right?
Right.
It's like, kind of the sound is always credited to Shearer in MGM films. The set design in these 30s films is always credited to every single RKO film with credit, Van Ness Glass. So it's very difficult to say whether he actually did do it, right, or whether he's credited for doing it because he was the head of the section.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
But it's brilliant.
It is. It's wonderful, and that is obviously what I must have loved when I saw it years ago.
Yeah.
So
part of the reason why it's considered, one of the earliest. I mean, I hate that the earliest. Someone will always find it an earlier one, but the traditional history of film noir in American cinema, the conventional narrative goes that it starts in 1941 or something with Maltese Falcon, and ends like in 57, 58 with Touch of Evil, right? And that's the period of film noir. And actually, this first of all disrupts the narrative, which is not a very brilliant narrative anyway, really. I mean, I do think, that the post-war films of the late 40s do have a very different look, vibe, thematics. Yeah, it's kind of, those films that I've been seeing crisscross and, all those brute force, all those Burt Lancaster films of the late 40s have a really kind of particular post-war kind of thematic look, energy, right, anger. Yeah, like the fears are different. It's often soldiers coming back with what we would now call post-traumatic stress syndrome. So there's difference, but actually kind of visually, yeah, and in terms of things like, I mean, the world being a dark place, one of dangerous desires, a world of shadows in which there's no justice, or in which justice is unreliable. All of those things are very much in this film. Yeah, I mean, simple things, and I think it's worth underlining. Things that seem very simple to us today would be erotically charged in a completely different way in 1940, before the pill, before the women's movement. I mean, the Margaret Talichet character going up to her boyfriend's flat and removing the stockings, right? Yeah, that would have a whole different set of connotations. It would evoke more powerfully kind of, certain desires. I mean, we're used now to seeing kind of, people naked and, in all kinds of sexual positions, but not at this time. Yeah. So those things, I mean, the film is also very much, it has a sexual component. Yeah. And it has a social critique. I think this film, for example, unlike the 1940s films, you really feel Depression era America, right? I mean, here is a star reporter with a byline, right? And he can only live in a rooming house, with other people, yeah, in a really cheap place where you hear noise everywhere, in a terrible neighborhood, right? The woman who is an executive secretary by the looks of it, yeah, has to share a bedroom with, at least 3 other people or whatever. You see beds arrayed in the same room, right? So, you could really get a sense of Depression era America, where things are scarce and people don't have work, and even people with work have very minimal material lives, yeah? Kind of, they don't have a lot of money.
Yeah, well, the character who's on trial in the first place is like, he comes in, I made $5 this week, I can pay you. I had some work.
Yes. So I loved all of that. And of course, the dream sequence has to be one of the best dream sequences in the history of American cinema.
Oh, you think so?
I do think so.
Those are big, big words.
Yes, well, I think, my God, every single image in that is so powerful. Like, that image of the court reading a newspaper where it says murder, 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 right? And then the image of blind justice, again, in the shadows, right? I mean, that is absolutely brilliant, really. Yeah.
Yeah, they're wonderful. It's almost like there are elements of kind of cartoon in there, but in the best way, in the way that like a newspaper cartoon will make something, make a theme or an idea so obvious through a very kind of feels like an overdone image. There's elements of that in there, but but I mean that it sounds like such an insult, that, but I mean it in the best way. It's so expressive, and it really works.
Yes.
And you just feel everything this guy's feeling through this nightmare.
Yes. Also, I haven't caught. Let's see who the cinematographer is, because the lighting is incredibly beautiful. It's
Nicholas Musaraka.
okay. I've never heard of him.
Let me just quickly look him up. He was born in Italy. He did a lot of Val Luton B movies.
Ah, okay, that makes sense.
He's got an awful lot of credits. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily
Okay.
be able to pick one out, but
Which Val Luton films has he done?
let me just quickly. I can do a common cast search on IMDb, so I can see what they collaborated on.
Okay. Well, while you do that, do you mind if I just refill my cup of coffee?
Of course, yeah. Okay, so I've got them up here. According to IMDb, the 5 films in which they are both in the credits are Cat People, The Seventh Victim, The Curse of the Cat People, Bedlam, and The Ghost Ship.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, so it makes sense. Yeah, this kind of connection to Val Luton's B unit production, that has become famous for having a particular style, even though, it was different directors kind of contributed to it. Mark Robson, Jacques Tourneur is the most famous of them. He did the most famous ones. But, if they share the cinematographer, then actually this film then also connects to all of that, which is also noir, yeah? And actually, this film is so interesting because it kind of touches on all of these interconnecting genres that often have a film noir style or look. Yeah. So the crime film, the detective film, the horror film, yeah, through the figure of Peter Lorre.
Yeah, well, I think when you were saying earlier this thing about the first film noir, like it's a contentious term. It's not that useful. The thing is that there is obviously something you can really identify as noir, but there are kind of grey areas and undefined sort of boundary areas to genres. So this has elements that you would recognise, but not necessarily every element. It's like it's not just you either are a film noir or you aren't. So it's kind of it is a bit of a it's something that people like to say probably. Oh, it's the first film noir, but it's just a film that has a lot of elements that you would come to recognise in film noir, generally speaking.
I'm not interested in policing boundaries anyway.
No.
I mean, I think what interests me about this film is the way that it uses all those stylistic flourishes, and thematics actually, and ways of telling a story that we associate with noir, to actually communicate something quite extraordinary, that which the film hangs on. It's a B movie. In many ways, it has a very trite crime story, that these studios, the B sections of these studios would churn out on a weekly basis practically, right? So I think what's extraordinary is how the, elements that we associate with noir that come from German expressionism, that here also actually have a connection to Eisenstein's style of filmmaking, how they're deployed to really create something quite extraordinary, really, which has to do with fear, right? And actually, it has to do with fear, with the impossibility of desire, with the justice with the culture you live in being unjust, right? With cops not caring and justice actually being absent or enshadowed, and actually the fears that people live through as a result of that, right? That's conveyed very, very vividly in the film, I think.
Yeah, and it really, really struck me. Again, this is something that I've obviously completely forgotten from the first time I saw it, or that never struck me the first time. But what struck me so much this time is the way that the injustice, or the kind of injustice and unprofessionalism of the justice system here is, again, kind of a cartoon. It's very exaggerated to the point where I was laughing, and I think maybe it's not intended to be a joke or funny, but I don't think I was laughing at the film. I was kind of with it, So the thing about the judge in the trial falling asleep, the lawyer needing to get his attention, the juror falls asleep, and then they have to wake up the judge to get the juror's attention. That's it's a comic setup, right? And it happens again later on. And the cop, for the second murder, the murder of Mr. Meng, the journalist kind of calls the police and gets their attention, and he says, "Well, this, and this," and the police officer goes, "Yeah, I guess that's a lead. Maybe we'll follow it up." And he does like a wink, like he finds it a joke, So, and that's something that I don't think I've really seen elsewhere. Like that's to treat it as a joke rather than something that's dramatic and unjust. To be a joke and unjust feels more unjust,
Yes.
Like they know how unseriously they're taking this.
Yes, I mean, it's like you say, it's done for laughs, but actually it ends up being a very coruscating critique, of the American justice system, And actually, also not, you get the feeling from the film that, these cops have a lot to do with and they don't care and it's just criminals anyway, and who cares if the wrong man gets sent to the chair? It happens all the time, right?
Yeah.
Which actually is what we know,
Yeah.
but which we never see, or we rarely see in American cinema, particularly of this period.
Yeah. And really, like, the journalist's nightmare is about going, oh my God, it could happen to me. It's like that kind of, like that privilege thing of going, oh, it's fine, it happens to other people. And then going, oh my God, what if I'm like other people? And I'm part of the same system,
Exactly.
And that's
There's a lovely replay. There's a lovely replay of that because the girlfriend berates him for maybe, getting the wrong person sentenced, right? And he's going to the chair, and he says, oh, what can I do about it? Blah, blah, blah. It's almost, it's not my, And then, of course, it happens to him. That's the thing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And actually, I do think that doubling up of that makes it quite powerful. It could happen to anybody, right? It happens to a journalist with a byline, like, wrongly accused, maybe wrongly sentenced, and nobody will care, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's a feeling of like, once you're in the dock, you are going to go to prison and be executed, probably. Like that's just the way it is. And the thing about, and it all comes from that thing of that when he tells the court in the younger guy's trial, when he tells the court, he said as a joke, oh, I could kill you, basically. Like that becomes the line that's jumped on, and it's as he said, it's his girlfriend who says, but that's what they're going to jump on, and you didn't have to tell them that. He's like, well, what could I do? It happened, and you kind of go, I mean, you're right, but to not, it's in going into the dream sequence that he realizes actually what that means, the weight of what he's done, and even though it is a case of telling the truth, the system is going to make everything like it's going to ruin everything.
Yeah. Yes. Let's talk about Peter Lorre because I do think he's extraordinary. I mean, I love him in almost everything, but he is particularly well deployed in this. So I don't know if you know, but he became famous playing a child murderer in M. I don't know if you've ever seen.
I've never seen him, but I know that's what made him famous.
Yeah. It's an extraordinary film. It's like one of the great masterpieces of the cinema. And then it's interesting because he did have a kind of a starring career, So, he appeared in a couple of Hitchcock films in England. I think, was it The Man Who Knew Too Much? I forget now.
Yes, it was, 1934.
But this is a small part in which he gets star billing, right? So obviously the film is publicized on his name, but actually which he only has a few scenes. And I do think that, first of all, for anybody who's seen M, his presence at the beginning just brings up that, if he's not a child molester, he's something else wrong, right? In this film, and then the way that he's shot. I mean, there are scenes in the stairs, right, where, so he is the stranger at the top of the stairs. And, there are scenes where the hero sees him and the camera just goes into these extraordinary huge close-ups of his face, right? Which are very powerful, very striking. Yeah. So it's not just his performance. The camera is always putting attention on him through the lighting and so on. Yeah. But he makes an incredibly vivid impression with very few gestures, like, and playing with and to the camera. I think it's really, to me, he's one of the great things in this movie. Really, like, the dream sequence, the way the voiceover falls on the hero's face, the interaction with that, and the way that it's lit, and Peter Lorre are absolutely, incredible moments.
Yeah, and as you say, that sense of threat when he's kind of made real, and he's with the girlfriend at the end, and she has caught him, identified him, doesn't want to let him go, but then somebody gradually starts to realise that she is in trouble, because he starts to see through her lie, and it does get quite scary for her, and it's his presence.
And creepy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a creepiness that he brings, right? Because on the one hand, he's very short and he's very slight, right? So that he can evoke a physical threat that's so powerful, right? It's really quite something. And actually, it has a lot to do with, evoking a kind of creepiness, that he's capable of going into, sordid directions that, ordinary people can't dream up.
Yeah.
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 But that he might have done yesterday to someone else, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's his voice as well. You can't underestimate.
Yes.
Oh, and Peter Lorre. That's his voice.
Yeah. But he also makes him sympathetic in some ways, right?
Completely,
So the low way of speaking, the thing about the dog, the moment with the dog. Yeah, it is kind of, I think, a truly extraordinary performance and an incredibly vivid presence, that's very strikingly filmed.
And it's in the way he's written as well. In a minor. It's in the I'm not going back there. And again, he makes as much of it as there is to make of it, but it's in there. The idea of obviously this guy's a murderer, and that, and you can only have sort of limited sympathy for him, I suppose, or the film only gives you space for so much sympathy for him. But you understand the pain. He has a kind of pain in him. You understand why he doesn't want to go back to where he's been, and so when he dies at the end, you kind of feel like that is probably the best outcome for this guy.
For sure, right? And also he says he doesn't want to go back to the asylum. I also, I really disliked the coda, the beginning and the end, in the diner. But it also evokes very interesting things. As I said, there is a whole critique of Depression America involved in that, right? So at the end, they have this exchange of dialogue where it says, well, basically we won't be eating here anymore because we're getting married, right? Yeah. So we'll, my wife will be, some cheesy dialogue about the wife now cooking his meals. But you also get a sense, actually, that they have been living in places that have no cooking facilities, that they don't have a stove, that they're forced to eat out, in really cheap places that probably cumulatively add to a very expensive way of eating because they can't afford a place that has cooking facilities, right? So the film is also full of little suggestions like that, that are cumulative. Though obviously nothing compares, to that extraordinary dream sequence.
Yeah.
Which actually I find it very difficult to talk about now because it almost feels like something you should look at over and over again and study somehow. It's so rich. Yeah, and kind of evocative. I really do think, certainly I've only seen this film once, but certainly on a first viewing, I do think it is one of the great dream sequences that I've ever seen, actually.
I'm glad you think so. I mean, it's interesting because when I was watching it, because I basically remembered the dream sequence. I mean, not image for image, but I remembered that's what it was and it was there. I was noticing all the things that were below my expectations from what I'd remembered of how good this film was. The acting and the writing and being clunky and so on and so forth. So I was going, oh God, maybe Jose ain't going to like this. Because I'm not liking it all that much in some ways. Which, like I say, then he got back to the dream sequence and I thought, oh, this is good. But, obviously, like that coming to that dream sequence new. I mean, I don't think I told you anything about this film, really, whenever I've mentioned it to you. So to come into it so blind.
I went into it completely blind. And as I said, my first thought is, why the hell has Mike chosen to see this? Because, the first 5-10 minutes, it really does look like a generic B movie. Actually, I thought, the whole courtroom scene, I did think, oh my God, this is someone who has no visual sense. The compositions were so ordinary, and, there was nothing intriguing or expressive about the camera placement, actually, in all of those. And then you go into his internal monologue, and then the dream sequence, and the film becomes something at another level altogether. It's completely extraordinary.
Yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed it. One final thing for me is, did you smile when Elisha Cook Jr. turned out to be the cabbie at the end? It was so cheesy, and that's part of what I was saying. It wraps up so neatly, but actually, I couldn't stop myself from smiling that he was okay and so happy and stuff.
I love him, So he also appears in The Maltese Falcon in one of he plays I suppose a queer character, a gay character, yeah. So that is made fun of, yeah, and he's got kind of this nervous, edgy, kind of punky quality, that is really deployed throughout kind of, all of cinema, particularly film noir in the 40s. So, but yes, I didn't laugh, but that is a very cheesy moment. Yeah, but it's what I would have expected of this type of film, yeah. So that's not what distinguishes this film.
No.
Because actually, you expect any B film to have had cheesy moments like that. What distinguishes this one is, that internal monologue, the dream sequence, the Peter Lorre's performance, yeah, and actually what that evokes and what that says, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Good. I'm glad I've watched it again. I must say, I'm glad I've watched it again, because that's been 16 years ago, and I will watch this a second time. One of these days I'll get around to it, and it's sort of, in all the ways it needs to, it stands up to what I remembered loving about it the first time when I watched it on a small TV at the end of a dark room at 2 a.m.
Highly recommended. Whether it's the first film noir or not, who cares? It's an early one, and it does extraordinary things, with some moments that really will remain indelible. So we highly recommend it. Mm-hmm. And thank you very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, and YouTube to listen to us. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.